Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. We have a really great guest on for today. He's retired Admiral John Palmer. He's here to talk about a book which I found personally fascinating about leadership and management. So, without further ado, Admiral Palmer, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much, Donald. I really appreciate the time.
Well, we appreciate your service. You know, we sometimes forget what a sacrifice people make. But as we ask all our guests, John, tell us a little bit about your background, then a little bit about your book, and finally a website before we get into
Sure.
more.
Sure. Well, my name is John Palmer. I am currently CEO of Sheltron Incorporated. Used to be named UV Sheltron. We specialize in two different types of products. One is under the UV Sheltron division, are devices that use ultraviolet light to disinfect air and objects in spaces, very timely in a COVID environment. We also have an EV Sheltron division that makes electrical vehicle charging stations. Fully mobile, they can be set up in one day. You can have as many as 6 chargers, customize it the way you want it. So both divisions very timely right now, as you might think, with the pandemic as well as the move toward electric vehicles and renewables and so forth. Background before that, I served 32 years in the U.S. Navy. And was on 4 ships for a total of about 9 years of sea duty. I held command 3 times over 4 units for about 6 years. My background within the Navy was a supply corps officer, so it lends itself very well to logistics and small business discussions, as the supply corps are the business managers of the fleet. I'll also point out the supply corps, very interestingly, are quite operational in their first 10 years. So we have officers assigned to SEAL teams and submarines and everything in between. So it really was an exciting time for me to serve. In that amount of time, I got married, had 2 children, have 4 grandchildren with a 5th on the way. And so very pleased and blessed with how things went in my Navy career. Before that, I was a student at the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. It gave me a lot of the formative lessons that I learned in preparation for the Navy. And then as the basis for the start of the book, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a cattle and tobacco farm in Lexington, Kentucky. Mother and father were both Depression era people born in the 20s. And so they gave us a lot of old world lessons on the farm that we called out in the first part of the book. That I think will be quite interesting as we discuss through. My sister and my brother and I still run 2 family farms back in Kentucky, albeit from a distance from time to time. In terms of
John, let me interrupt you.
Yeah.
What's the name of your book before we go any further?
Happy to do so. The name of the book is From Bluegrass to Blue Water: Lessons in Farm Philosophy and Navy Leadership. And I'll even picture of the book. You can zoom in if you would like. It is available on a dozen online outlets, as well as in various Barnes and Nobles, Joseph Beth, and things like that. So not too hard to find. It was released on October 26th. The book is really it's a book of lessons, quite frankly, and the lessons span from adolescence to include the parents of adolescents through schooling and professional life. And the professional life focus is from new entrant or in the military junior officer all the way to the C-suite. Presently, I'm a CEO. And if you're thinking military, it's admiral or general officer in that capacity. As a rear admiral, retired, and a CEO, I think I have a unique perspective on both military and corporate careers. For every lessons chapter, there is a practical application chapter that immediately follows with a story. It could be farm yarns, it could be barracks banter from the Citadel, it could be sea stories from my time in the Navy that shows the practical application of the lessons, and those lessons that worked very, very well, and maybe those were lessons that didn't work so well. Book begins on the farm as a child with farm family background and upbringing on Central Kentucky cattle and tobacco farm. Mom and Dad basically had 3 priorities for us, and that was farm, faith, and education. So many lessons were learned in those 18 years on the farm. Also, the book covers, in as much as education was very important to my family, my mother was an educator, as were many of her siblings, covers education in general, but goes into detail at the Citadel. And the reason is it prepared me uniquely for the Navy, and it also reinforced some of the lessons that we learned back on the farm, which was good. Then when you get into the Navy portion of the book, as we mentioned a little bit, junior officer, new entrant, all the way to the C-suite. And as you get more senior,
John, I'm going to interrupt you again because I'm going to say, let's go directly to the point. Our audience is small business. Can you give an example of where your experience, small businesses are hungry for ways of doing things better. Do you have an example that you learned from your experience that you could share with our audience?
I would tell you one of the things that I think is key, that is pervasive through it, is communications. Communications, as I define it, is the root of all evil when you don't have enough, and it cures all ills when you apply more. Even more and more of an issue now, because I'm fearful that we have some folks in the younger generations, and this is not casting aspersions on them at all, but they have grown up in a point and click environment where they operate with very, very lean media, whether it's text, emails, or so forth. And they think that the biggest fallacy of the 21st century is relationships don't matter. I would argue they even matter more now. How many emails do you ignore a day, Donald? And the answer is as many as you can get away with, right? So, you really have to have that 30-second speech ready to go. You really have to be prepared to talk through the nature of your business and what value you add and what you can do for a prospective customer, because the interpersonal relationships and the interactions come less frequently now. So you got to make it stick when you have that first meeting and so forth. So I think communications is one of those things where it's a little bit of a dying art right now, quite frankly, because of the over reliance on the more lean media out there rather than face to face. I would tell you my success rate is decidedly higher if I can get in front of somebody and talk about my products. If I can get in front of somebody and talk about a project we have going on, I don't have difficulty getting the call back and so forth. But if I rely just on email, if I rely just on text, or perhaps just through LinkedIn messaging and so forth, the response rate is not that high.
Hmm. Well, but then the problem always is, how do you get to somebody to talk to them directly? If you ever tried to get to somebody, it's always difficult.
It can be. I would tell you that conferences are still a good thing to in which you can engage folks. Now that we've sort of pushed away from the pandemic protections that we had, and we feel like we can meet together again and so forth, I find as I go to expos and conferences, people are just dying to talk about what they're doing and what you're doing. So I think those are opportunities in which people can engage, and ones that should be exploited. I was a little bit slow to go back to them, I will admit, but once we got back engaged in seeing people face to face, we've really been leveraging those quite well.
Well, let me stop a minute. You said before the program, you're now running a very interesting company. Tell us a little bit about that company before we go further.
Yeah, Sheltron Incorporated, formerly known as UV Sheltron, and you can still find that online. Um, as I said, it was originally conceived in response to COVID. And the idea is we can help with COVID, and so we need some asymmetric ways of protecting ourselves in the workplace where people are compelled to be together. So how do you do that? Well, we started off with ultraviolet devices that use UVC, basically towers, cabinets, and handhelds, and that's direct irradiation. So we have a 6-foot tower that will do a 9,000 square foot room in just a couple of minutes at 99.99% disinfection. This is direct irradiation, and the way it works is it attacks the RNA and DNA bonds of the pathogen and basically shatters the pathogen so it can't replicate. It's very effective, and UVC has been used My heavens, since the 1960s for disinfection. So it is not a new technology, well tested. Now in air purification, we have a very unique product. It's called Pure Air, and it doesn't use direct irradiation. It uses UVA and a fibrous catalyst of titanium dioxide. And inside the machine that draws the air in with a fan, the light excites the catalyst and creates hydroxyls, which are oxygen and hydrogen molecules. And basically, I call them assassin molecules because they rip the electrons off the pathogen chain that goes through and creates carbon dioxide. These items are tested by the Public Health Agency of Canada, Wake Forest University, in a practical application test. They do a great job in occupied spaces, protecting folks like you and me from whatever bad biology our cohorts may be bringing into the office. So the Pure Air is really good at attacking air quality because we found out in 2021 through the CDC and Harvard Medical School that from a COVID perspective, and I would argue flu as well, most of that is transmitted through aerosol transmission and not so much from slimy doorknobs and keyboards and things like that. On the other side of the equation, and the other side of the business is something that we've gotten into over the last year, which is electrical vehicle charging stations. So we're manufactured in Michigan. We're doing a great job up there, working for the electrification efforts. We've just now gotten into the DoD spaces. And so what we do that is different from other people with electrical vehicle charging stations is we don't sink them in concrete. We create basically a very large box, as you might say, that has 3 chargers on each side. You can set it up in one day. You can either hook it to the grid, or you can make it go solar, or you can do a hybrid. If you make a bad decision and put it in the wrong place around your business, it's causing too much traffic or too much headache, you can move it. And it also protects against obsolescence as well, because we can swap out the chargers for you every 30 months or so. So if you think about it, what most people I run into, they are terrified of sinking into concrete electrical vehicle charges that are going to go by the wayside of this phone right here after about 24, 30 months. You know, this is going to be a very nice paperweight and nothing more in about 2.5 years. And they're worried, and they should be worried. They're worried about the charger technology really outpacing the investment they make in chargers that are normally placed in concrete right now. So it is a very exciting new market in which we're working, from a vehicle charging standpoint, in addition to the ultraviolet light disinfection products that we have.
John, we're talking with retired Rear Admiral John Palmer. First off, let's get the websites for your products, which frankly I find more exciting than your book. But
That's
so
okay.
for our audience, what are your websites for your products?
Okay, so www.uvsheltron.com. So that would be UVSHELTRON.com. And then there's also www.evsheltron.com. That's EVSHELTRON.com. And I would point out, if you go on the EV website, that one's being updated right now, and you see the word Boost Hub. That is what we call the electrical vehicle charging station. It is a hub because you can put 6 chargers in it. You can put it in a parking lot, and the parking spaces on both sides can charge. And we can also adapt them to whatever building type that you have near the charger. So if you have a very nice limestone facade, we can make it look like limestone, or we can leave it kind of the shiny Gucci color that it is online to attract attention. It all depends on what you want.
Well, let me ask you this question. Back up on your purifier. Is there a consumer model for the air purifier?
There absolutely is. And right now we're doing very well with hospitals and nursing homes in the state of Michigan, but we do sell to people in their homes. A good example is, I had a gentleman, and I won't go into locations or names or anything, but he had a wife who's immunocompromised. She was receiving in-home health care. He was worried about whatever biological pathogens that were being brought in the house. So he brought a Pure Air 200. Pure Air 200 is about 18 inches tall, 9 inches wide, and it's 9 pounds. And so it could sit right by her bed. It will do a room of 8 foot ceilings of 1,200 square feet, so plenty for a bedroom. And so it is cycling the air in her room 3 times per hour, pushing it through the fibrous catalyst, and basically converting whatever pathogens that are in the air into carbon dioxide and trace water vapor. And these products have been tested up to and including anthrax spores, and they work. So I would tell you, viruses are an easy day when you compare it to tougher bacteria and mold and the like. But yes, you can use the pure air in your home just as easily as you can place it in the workspaces.
Could I ask you, how much does a unit like that cost?
Pure Air 200 is $13.99. The Pure Air 500 is $39.99, and with the $3,999. And it will do 4,000 square feet, assuming 8 foot ceilings. It's easier for people to think in terms of square foot than if I say, hey, 32,000 cubic feet. The heads explode, mine included. So I operate from an 8 foot ceiling square footage description, and that helps people a lot.
Mhm. Well, you're leading a fascinating life for a retired person.
Well, it is. I'm very, very blessed, and as is my wife, and we have had many, many wonderful years and wonderful challenges. We moved, I think, 18 or 19 times in the Navy. One time we moved 5 times in 6 years, so it's not always been easy. When we got to the final move and I was getting out, you can call it the 19th move or the 20th, depending on how you want to count them. My wife says, I'm calling the shots on number 20 and I'm going home. And you can come with me or not. So we decided to move to her home of Spartanburg, South Carolina. So her 4 older brothers are here in town. One of our 2 kids and 2 of our 4 grandkids are here. So it makes good sense. Ironically, I was looking for work here in the upstate. We have BMW here. We have Michelin North America here. There's a great deal of business in the upstate in South Carolina. I was approached by someone in Detroit, in Troy, Michigan, about taking on the CEO job at UV Sheltron. I know Detroit well. I went there every year as a kid. We had a sister church there. I went there, and my final command was DLA Land and Maritime. We procured $6 billion in parts annually, much of which was for the Army's wheeled and tracked vehicles, which is commanded out of TACOM up there in Warren near Detroit. So I spent a lot of time in Detroit. So I did advise the folks there, hey, I'm comfortable here in South Carolina. I'm not really interested in moving to Detroit. They had no problem with that. The parent company, Unified Business Technologies, has a footprint from India to Jordan. So when we get on the Hollywood squares for big staff meetings across businesses and the amalgamation, we're looking at all time zones and the like. So fortunately for me, with BMW and Michelin North America being here in the upstate South Carolina, several times a day, there's a nonstop flight to Detroit. So if I need to be in the office, I can get on the 6 a.m. flight and be in the office at 8:30 and get on the 9 p.m. flight going home and be home by midnight. So it works, but it is a challenge from time to time, but certainly worth it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, okay, now that we've gone all the way up this way, let's go back to your book, and I'll ask you this question: from what you said in the book, what is the thing that you most use today in your current job?
That's a good question. What do I most use today in my current job? I would tell you that, well, number one, when you look at the book, and it goes from the continuum of new entrant, which is, I say in the book, you're in the business of following orders as a new entrant. You're just doing execution, right? It's blunt force trauma work, and you got to be willing to do it to make your bones, so that you can stay till middle management, mid-grade officer, senior officer, and so forth. When you get into the mid-grade officer to senior officer is when critical thinking comes to the fore, and gray space management comes to the fore, and trade-off comes to the fore, and bringing data to the table comes to the fore. And I would tell you that is where I make my bones, right? Gray space management and critical thinking are very important.
What do you mean by gray space management? I'm sorry.
So So when you're a new kid on the block, let's say you're a junior officer in the military, or you're a new entrant to a law firm, and you're trying to make your bones. You're in the business of following orders, and that's an environment where you live at the poles, right and wrong, black and white, go no go. I've got policy. I either violate it and I'm to the good, or I'm to the bad, or I follow it and I'm to the good. It is a very binary world that new people engage when they are new entrants to the work. When you move into the gray spaces, as you reach middle management, you then have to blend that black and white into gray, because you are now in the business of resource trade-off. There are not many zero-sum games there. There are not a lot of complete winners and complete losers, because the resources in play will be dispensed to whomever makes the best case for accruing those resources. And the key to making that case is data, right? Data clarifies. Data takes us out of the fallacy of perception is reality. That's a bunch of bunk. Perception is perception, and the truth is absolute. And data helps you see that absolute truth. So as you get into the gray spaces, trade-off, trade-off is the currency of the realm. And you have to understand, when you are making a play for resources, it usually comes in a decision meeting. And in those decision meetings, you need to know who's in the room, who's making the decision, who are your allies, who are your opponents, what's your role? Are you at the head table making the case? Are you on the wall just fielding questions for your boss because he or she couldn't make it? Knowing your role is very important. And then that allows you to fight for those resources. And so I would tell you, living in the gray spaces is probably one of the biggest things I learned that helped me along over time, and the need to bring appropriate data to the fore. It has stunned me over the years how far some folks will get into the decision process without having the appropriate data to confirm whether the decision is a good one or a bad one.
I, I can't argue with that one over the years. You can't, to but we have just a few minutes left. Your websites, the website for your book and the website for your products, because it's been a fascinating half hour.
Yes, sir. Well, I gave you my websites for my products, and they are, and I'll repeat them. They are www.uvsheltron.com and www.evsheltron.com. We'll have a Sheltron Incorporated overarching website here pretty soon, because we are restructuring from UV Sheltron to Sheltron Incorporated to encompass both of the product lines. And my personal website, for which I have my authorship on there and the book is covered, as well as consulting, is jtpalmerenterprises.com. So that's JTPalmerenterprises. So jtpalmerenterprises, all one word, .com. And that will take you to my website, and you can see some more about the book. You can see some about the consulting. I discuss a little bit the product line with which I work right now, and all very good there. So I've given you a host of websites, and people can.
Well, you're doing a host of things, but now, John, we have just a few minutes left. What would you like to leave our audience with?
In this day and time, as you lead, nothing shows you care like showing up, right? So, and this applies to both the military as well as the corporate side. So what does that mean? You got to care enough to go in the spaces where your people are working and to go in their activities and learn enough to be able to empathize and identify. Now, if you were in an apprentice program where you learned as you came up, it's not that hard. But nothing shows you care like showing up means you get out on the floor, you understand the problems, you can relate to the problems, and you accrue eyewitness, right? Eyewitness credibility in that regard. And nothing shows you care like showing up also applies to the softer side, which is understanding people's families and so forth. Whether it's celebration or tragedy, knowing enough about your people to know that they're on a high or a low is very important, because they need to know their boss cares enough about them to understand what they're going through and can help them celebrate the highs and pick them up when they are achieving their lows. You know, we do not have the time or resources to make bad hires and retain bad people, or worse, lead people badly and make them go away. So I think that, you know, the in the book there's a section in there, and it keeps going through the whole way through. Nothing shows you care like showing up, and you see it at the very early stages when you're a new entrant and you really got to get out there where the folks are working, all the way to where it's much more challenging as a CEO or admiral, where to find those times when you can go do your checks and see the people, very, very hard, but you have to do it. You have to do it for good order and discipline and morale, and for people to be able to identify with you, because you want people to identify with you and to be able to say, follow that guide, follow that gal into a house fire to do what needs to be done to advance the corporate interests, the military mission, whatever the case may be.
Well, on that note, John Palmer, we say thank you for a very illuminating time. Thank you so much.
Donald, the pleasure was all mine. I'd be delighted to talk with you again in the future. And if you ever need me, please do not hesitate to ask.